The blazing Florida sun cast its relentless rays over a grand mansion in Coral Gables, its sprawling gardens meticulously manicured into labyrinthine paths adorned with lush greenery and vibrant tropical blooms. The Mediterranean Revival home stood like a relic from another era, where Ernest Ernie Harrison, a retired Navy officer turned historian, was polishing his vintage Cadillac with care. Nearby, his 10-year-old son, Nate, darted through the gardens with the boundless energy of youth, transforming the grounds into his imagined jungle expedition. Ernie glanced at his son with a smile, the boy's laughter echoing through the property. It was a peaceful day, at least on the surface. Nate ducked behind a hibiscus bush, giggling as if he'd outwitted an imaginary adversary. Suddenly, the laughter stopped. A sharp intake of breath, followed by a low wheeze, broke the tranquil silence. Nate froze, his hand clutching his chest. Panic replaced the playful gleam in his eyes as his breaths grew shallow and rapid. Searching frantically in his pockets, Nate realized the worst. He didn't have his inhaler. Desperation gripped him as he staggered forward, each step an insurmountable effort. The air felt like it had turned into molasses, thick and unyielding. "Dad!" he gasped, his voice a strained whisper as he reached out for the car. Ernie dropped the polishing cloth instantly, his heart clenching at the sight of his pale-faced son. "Nate, where's your inhaler?" Ernie's voice trembled as he crouched to his son's level. Nate managed to utter, "In the garden. I lost it." Ernie's face tightened, scanning the expanse of the vast yard. Searching the entire garden was impossible, with Nate in this state. Without hesitation, he said, "Stay here, son." "Don't move. I'll grab the spare inhaler from inside. I'll be right back." He bolted toward the house, his boots pounding against the stone pathway. The spare inhaler was upstairs in the main bathroom, a sprint away. Ernie's mind raced as fast as his legs. "Just a few minutes," he assured himself. "I'll fix this." Inside the house, his steps echoed through the halls as he bounded up the staircase. His movements became frantic as he rummaged through the medicine cabinet. Relief flooded him when he found the inhaler. But as he hurried back down the stairs, his foot caught on a small toy Nate had left behind. The world seemed to slow as Ernie lost his balance, crashing down the stairs. His head struck the marble floor with a sickening thud, and everything faded into darkness. Outside, Nate's condition worsened. Each breath was a monumental effort, his small frame trembling as he clung to the car for support. He glanced anxiously at the house. His dad wasn't back yet. Fear crept in, not just from his inability to breathe, but from the gnawing sense that something was terribly wrong. Summoning every ounce of strength, Nate stumbled toward the gate. His legs felt like jelly, his lungs on fire, but he pressed on. As he reached the sidewalk, a young woman in workout clothes jogged by, her earbuds drowning out the world. "Help, please," Nate rasped, collapsing to his knees. The woman stopped instantly, pulling out her earbuds. Her name was Lauren Parker, a local nurse on her day off. One look at Nate's ashen face, and she knew what was happening. She dropped her water bottle and knelt beside him. "Sweetheart, you're having an asthma attack," she said calmly, digging into her bag. "Here, take this." Lauren handed Nate her own inhaler, gently guiding it to his mouth. "Breathe in slowly. That's it. Easy now." With shaky hands, Nate did as instructed. After a couple of puffs, the tightness in his chest began to ease. Relief swept over him, though his body still trembled with exhaustion and fear. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice still hoarse. Lauren smiled softly, brushing a stray curl from his forehead. "You're okay now, but where's your family? You shouldn't be out here alone like this." Tears welled in Nate's eyes. "My dad, he went inside to get my inhaler, but he hasn't come back. I'm scared something happened." Lauren's expression grew serious. "Let's go check on him, okay? Can you walk?" Nate nodded weakly, and together they made their way back toward the house. As they entered the grand foyer, Nate's small hand gripping hers tightly, Lauren gasped. Ernie lay at the base of the staircase, motionless. Lauren's heart skipped a beat as her gaze fell on Ernie's lifeless form sprawled on the cold marble floor. She tightened her grip on Nate's hand, feeling the boy's trembling intensify as his eyes widened in terror. "Stay right here," Lauren instructed gently but firmly, crouching next to Ernie. She quickly assessed him, placing 2 fingers on his neck to find a pulse while listening for breath. Relief washed over her when she detected a faint heartbeat and shallow breathing. "He's alive," she murmured, more to herself than Nate. She immediately reached for her phone and dialed 911. "This is Lauren Parker. I need an ambulance at 478 Maple Drive, Coral Gables," she said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her. "We have an adult male, unconscious from a fall with a possible head injury. He's breathing but unresponsive. Also, I have a child who recently had a severe asthma attack and needs medical attention." The dispatcher assured her help was on the way. Lauren hung up and turned to Nate, who was now crouched beside her, tears streaming down his pale face. "Is my dad going to be okay?" he asked in a broken whisper, his voice barely audible through his sobs. Lauren cupped his small face with her hands, locking eyes with him. "He's breathing, Nate. That's a good sign. The paramedics will be here soon, and they'll take care of him. But right now, I need you to be strong for your dad, okay?" Nate sniffled, nodding slightly as he wiped his tears with the back of his hand. Minutes later, the wail of sirens filled the air, and Nate visibly relaxed as the paramedics rushed into the house. Lauren briefed them on Ernie's condition, stepping aside to give them room to work. While one team worked on stabilizing Ernie, another paramedic knelt by Nate. "Let's take a look at you, buddy," he said with a kind smile, pulling out a portable oxygen mask. Lauren stayed close, holding Nate's hand as they ensured his breathing was stable. The lead paramedic approached Lauren. "The father has sustained a significant head injury. We're transporting him to Coral Gables General. Can you accompany the boy?" "Yes, absolutely," Lauren said without hesitation. She turned to Nate. "We're going to ride in the ambulance with your dad, okay? I'll be with you the whole time." Nate nodded, clinging to her like a lifeline. The ambulance ride was tense. Ernie lay strapped to a stretcher, monitors beeping steadily as the paramedics worked to keep him stable. Nate sat beside Lauren, his oxygen mask in place, as he watched his father with wide, tear-filled eyes. Lauren spoke softly to him, her words a soothing balm against the storm of emotions swirling in his young heart. "Your dad's strong, Nate. He's a fighter. And you're doing amazing, staying brave for him." The boy leaned into her, his small hand clutching hers tightly. At the hospital, Ernie was whisked away to the intensive care unit while Nate was taken to the pediatric wing for observation. Lauren stayed by his side, never letting go of his hand. As she helped him settle into a hospital bed, a pediatrician entered the room to examine him. "You're lucky to have had help so quickly," the doctor said, glancing at Lauren. "He'll need to rest and stay under observation, but his breathing is stabilizing nicely." "Thank you," Lauren replied, her voice heavy with relief. Nate looked up at her, his expression a mixture of gratitude and lingering fear. "Are you going to leave now?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Lauren crouched beside his bed, meeting his gaze. "No, Nate, I'm not going anywhere. I promised I'd stay with you and your dad, and I meant it. You're not alone in this." The boy's lips quivered as tears welled in his eyes again. Without a word, he threw his arms around her neck, holding on tightly. Lauren hugged him back, her heart breaking for this brave little boy who had endured so much in such a short time. She silently vowed to see this through no matter what. Hours turned into days, and the weight of uncertainty hung heavy in the air. Ernie remained in a coma, his condition critical but stable. Lauren, true to her word, stayed with Nate every step of the way, taking on a role she never expected. His guardian, his rock, his source of comfort. Despite her efforts to keep his spirits up, Nate struggled. His once bright laughter was replaced by quiet sadness, and his wide eyes carried a weight far beyond his years. At night, he often woke from nightmares, crying out for his father. Lauren knew she couldn't replace what Nate had lost, but she could be there for him. One afternoon, as they sat in the hospital waiting room, she gently took his hand. "You know, Nate, it's okay to feel scared," she said softly. "It's okay to cry. But I also know your dad would want you to remember how strong you are. You're not alone in this, and neither is he." Nate looked up at her, his eyes glistening. "Do you think he can hear us?" Lauren smiled gently. "I do. And I think it would mean the world to him to hear your voice. Want to try?" The boy hesitated, then nodded. Together they went to Ernie's room. Nate climbed into the chair beside his father's bed, his small hand resting on his dad's larger one. "Hi, Dad," he began, his voice trembling. "It's me, Nate. I miss you. Please wake up soon. I need you." Lauren placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder, her own eyes misty. She knew this journey wasn't over, but in that moment she saw a flicker of resilience in Nate, a spark that gave her hope. The hospital days stretched into weeks, the sterile walls becoming an unwelcome home for Nate and Lauren. Ernie's condition remained unchanged, his body lying still in the ICU as machines monitored every fragile beat and breath. Despite the quiet despair hanging over them, Lauren refused to let Nate's spirit slip further into darkness. She became his steady companion, showing up every morning with his favorite breakfast, a blueberry muffin and apple juice, and sitting with him through long hours of waiting. One afternoon, after Nate had finished his homework in the hospital's small family lounge, Lauren decided it was time to break through the heaviness surrounding him. "Hey, Nate," she said, sliding into the chair next to him. "I was thinking, your dad would love to hear about all the things you've been doing lately. How about we write him a letter? You can tell him anything about school, how brave you've been, even that time you beat me at checkers." Nate frowned slightly, unsure. But what if he doesn't wake up to read it? Lauren reached out, gently brushing his hair from his forehead. "Even if he's asleep, I think a part of him can still hear you. Sometimes hearing the voice of someone you love can make all the difference." Nate hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Together they sat at a small table, and Lauren handed him a notebook and pen. At first the words came slowly, his little hand clumsy with uncertainty, but soon the thoughts began to flow. "Dear Dad, it's me, Nate. I miss you so much. The doctors say you're resting, but I wish you'd wake up already. I need you to teach me how to throw a spiral football like you promised. Oh, and Lauren's been taking care of me. She's really nice, but I don't think she knows how to fix the TV like you do. Yesterday I told her the story about the time you made spaghetti and forgot the sauce, and she laughed so hard she cried. I miss that about you, Dad. How you always made me laugh even when I was sad. Please come back. I'm trying to be brave, but it's hard. I love you. Nate." As Nate finished, Lauren smiled. "That's beautiful, Nate. Your dad's going to love hearing that." "Can we read it to him?" Nate asked, clutching the notebook tightly. "Of course," Lauren replied, standing. Back in Ernie's ICU room, Nate pulled his chair closer to the bed. His small voice filled the room as he read aloud, the words carrying a blend of longing and love. Lauren watched from a distance, her chest tightening as she saw how fiercely Nate clung to hope. It was in moments like this she realized how deeply this little boy had worked his way into her heart. Weeks passed, and life became a delicate balancing act. Nate returned to school, though his teachers noted his quiet demeanor and subdued energy. Lauren met with them regularly, assuring them that Nate was coping as best he could under the circumstances. She continued to take him to visit Ernie daily, always encouraging him to talk to his father. One evening, after a particularly difficult day, Lauren decided to change their routine. Instead of going straight to the hospital, she took Nate to a nearby park. "Why are we here?" Nate asked. his tone curious but cautious. "Because I think you and I need some fresh air," Lauren replied, pulling a soccer ball from the car. "Your dad would want you to keep doing the things you love, and I bet he'd love to hear you scored a goal." At first, Nate seemed hesitant, as if playing felt like a betrayal of the worry that had consumed him. But as Lauren dribbled the ball past him with a playful taunt, a spark of his old energy returned. He chased after her, laughing as he tried to steal the ball. For an hour, the hospital and its weighty reality faded into the background. When they finally sat on the grass, panting and sweaty, Nate turned to Lauren. "Do you think he'd be proud of me?" Lauren wrapped an arm around his shoulders. "Nate, your dad's proud of you every second of every day. Even now, while he's resting, I know he's proud of how brave and strong you've been." One morning, as Lauren walked Nate to school, her phone buzzed. Seeing the hospital's number, her heart leapt to her throat. "Hello," she answered, her voice tight with anticipation. "Miss Parker, this is Dr. Fields. I wanted to inform you that Mr. Harrison has shown signs of regaining consciousness. It's early, but he opened his eyes briefly during our rounds this morning." Lauren gasped, tears springing to her eyes. "That's amazing news. Can we see him?" "Yes, but I'd recommend keeping it brief for now," the doctor advised. After dropping Nate off, Lauren went straight to the hospital. When she entered Ernie's room, her heart swelled. His eyes were open, glazed and unfocused, but undeniably awake. "Ernie," she said softly, stepping closer. His gaze shifted slightly, landing on her. Recognition flickered in his tired eyes. "You've got a lot of people waiting for you, especially one little boy who misses you more than anything," Lauren said, her voice catching. Ernie's lips twitched into the faintest smile. That evening, Lauren brought Nate to see his father. As they entered the room, Nate froze, tears welling in his eyes, as he saw Ernie looking back at him. "Dad!" he cried, rushing to the bedside. Ernie's hand lifted weakly, resting on Nate's head, though his voice was faint. The words were clear. "Hey, buddy. Missed you." Nate sobbed, burying his face in his father's chest. Lauren stood back, her own tears falling silently as she witnessed the reunion. Over the following weeks, Ernie's recovery became a family effort. Lauren continued to care for Nate while supporting Ernie through therapy and rehabilitation. One evening, as they sat together at home, Nate turned to Lauren. "You know, you're like our guardian angel," he said matter-of-factly. Lauren laughed softly, ruffling his hair. "I'm no angel, Nate. I just care about you and your dad." Ernie, still leaning on his crutches, smiled from across the room. "Well, you've earned that title around here," he said, his voice steadying with each day. And in that moment, surrounded by love, they all realized that family wasn't just about blood. It was about the people who chose to stand by you when the world felt its heaviest. The next day, Olga arrived at the Harrison family mansion holding a small but lively surprise, a sheepdog puppy with soft, fluffy fur and eyes that sparkled like polished glass marbles. As she stepped into the sunlit garden, the puppy wriggled with excitement, a bright yellow ball clamped firmly in its mouth. Its wagging tail moved so quickly it became a blur. Without hesitation, the puppy bounded forward, its tiny paws skimming the lush green grass. It ran directly to Liam, who was sitting cross-legged on the ground, distracted by a toy car in his small hands. At first, Liam didn't notice, but when the puppy came to a stop and plopped the ball at his feet, its eager bark broke through Liam's reverie. He glanced up, startled. For a moment his face was still, as if unsure how to react. Then his dark, somber eyes began to light up, glowing with a joy that had been absent since his father's accident. "He's yours," Olga said with a soft, encouraging smile, kneeling next to Liam. "His name is Brownie. I thought you could use a new friend." Liam blinked, his gaze flickering between Olga and the little dog. He dropped the toy car and tentatively extended a hand toward Brownie, his fingers brushing through the pup's velvety fur. Brownie, delighted with the attention, abandoned the ball and began hopping in tiny circles around Liam, yipping happily. For the first time in weeks, an authentic smile broke across Liam's face. It was small at first, hesitant, but it soon widened into an uncontrollable grin that illuminated his features. "Brownie," Liam whispered, his voice filled with wonder. Olga's heart swelled at the sight. Love in its purest form doesn't always need words, she thought, watching the puppy dart playfully from one side of the garden to the other, chasing Liam as if they had been companions forever. Brownie's boundless energy and enthusiasm seemed to seep into the mansion's air, chasing away the shadows of sadness that had lingered there. Sometimes we just need the presence of another being to remind us that life is still beautiful, even in the midst of pain. From that day on, the garden became Liam and Brownie's personal playground. They spent hours together, running along the stone pathways that crisscrossed the expansive grounds. Brownie quickly revealed a love for obstacle courses, leaping over bushes and weaving through flower beds, with the ball firmly clutched in his jaws. Each time Liam threw the ball, Brownie's exaggerated attempts to catch it would send Liam into fits of laughter. It was as though the puppy's natural happiness filtered into the air, filling every corner of the estate with a renewed vitality. Even the mansion, once steeped in silence, seemed to hum with life again. One afternoon, after an energetic session of fetch, Liam trudged up to Olga, his cheeks flushed and his breath coming in short bursts. Yet his smile was as wide as ever. "Thank you, Olga," he said, clutching Brownie's ball tightly in his hand. "Brownie is the best friend I've ever had." Olga knelt down to meet his gaze, brushing a lock of hair from his damp forehead. "Love isn't measured by how long someone is in your life," she told him, her voice gentle, yet firm, "but by how deeply they touch your heart, and Brownie already loves you with all of his." Liam stared at her, his young face earnest. "Sometimes, in the deepest darkness," Olga continued, her hand resting lightly on Liam's shoulder, "a single spark is all it takes to light up everything. Brownie is that spark for you, Liam." The boy didn't respond with words, but his smile grew, and he threw his arms around Olga in a rare display of affection. While Brownie brought boundless joy to Liam's days, Olga's own routine remained unchanged. Every afternoon, after ensuring that Liam was settled and playing happily with Brownie, she would make her way to the hospital. There she would sit beside Ernest's bed, his motionless body lying in a state of quiet stillness. Her visits were marked by tender determination. She would hold Ernest's hand, her thumb gently brushing over his knuckles, as she spoke softly, her words like threads weaving a connection between them. "I am Olga," she would begin, her voice steady. "I know you don't know me yet, Ernest, but you and Liam have become my world." Each day she updated him on Liam's progress. "Liam is doing better," she whispered one afternoon, her eyes glistening. "He's smiling more now, thanks to Brownie, the sheepdog puppy I brought home. You should see them together. Liam laughs so much when they play in the garden." She paused, taking a steadying breath before continuing. "I hope you don't mind, but I've taken on the role of caring for him. I'm doing everything I can to keep him happy, to keep him strong." Her words often drifted toward confessions she hadn't shared with anyone else. "Can I tell you a secret, Ernest?" she murmured one evening, her fingers delicately caressing his forehead. "I'm only 25, but I've lived through more heartbreak than I care to admit. I have endometriosis, and it's made it impossible for me to have children of my own. I thought I'd come to terms with it, but when I look at Liam, when I see his kind eyes and his brave little heart, I feel like I've been given the greatest gift I could ever ask for." She hesitated, her voice breaking as she added, "I'm happy, Ernest. I'm happy with your son, and I'm happy with you. But I need you to wake up. Liam needs you to wake up. Please, please come back to us." Her words lingered in the air, heavy with longing. Over time, Olga began bringing books to read aloud during her visits, convinced that her voice might reach Ernest in ways that medicine could not. Of all the books she brought, The Little Prince held special meaning. It wasn't just because the book resonated with her own childhood, but because Liam had once mentioned that it was his father's favorite. One crisp afternoon, sitting by Ernest's bedside, she opened the book to one of its most poignant passages. On ne voit bien qu'avec le cœur, she read softly, her French accent flawless. L'essentiel est invisible pour les yeux. She repeated the line in English, her voice steady despite the emotions welling within her. It is only with the heart that one can see rightly. What is essential is invisible to the eye. Her gaze lingered on Ernest's serene face. I wonder if you can hear me, she mused aloud. Maybe these words are finding you wherever you are. Maybe they're helping you find your way back to us. She gently brushed a stray strand of hair from his forehead. The love we feel doesn't need to be seen to be real, Ernest. I hope you can feel it, my love, Liam's love, reaching out to you. At home, Olga continued to nurture Liam with quiet care and unwavering support. On nights when his sadness overwhelmed him, she would sit beside him, whispering words of comfort. "You're not alone, Liam," she told him one evening, as he cried softly into his pillow. "Your father's love is still with you, even if you can't see it right now, and I'm here too. I'll always be here for you." As she smoothed his hair, she reflected on the boundless capacity of the human heart for love, for pain, and for resilience. Each scar life leaves us is a seed of strength, she thought. The weeks rolled on, and though Liam still had moments of sadness, there were glimmers of light. Brownie remained a constant source of joy, filling Liam's days with laughter. One afternoon, as Olga watched from the kitchen window, she saw Liam running through the garden with Brownie, his face aglow with happiness. Her chest swelled with pride and relief. Slowly but surely, the boy was healing. Later that day, Olga returned from the hospital with a renewed sense of purpose. Walking through the quiet halls of the mansion, she thought about how much her life had changed since she had stepped into Liam and Ernest's world. "This wasn't part of my plan," she murmured to herself. "But maybe that's what makes it so special." As she entered the study, she found Liam curled up on the couch, fast asleep with Brownie nestled at his side. The peaceful scene made her heart ache with affection. In that moment, she understood a profound truth. Family isn't forged by blood alone, it's created by the invisible bonds of care and devotion. A week later, as the golden light of the setting sun painted the hospital walls with warm tones, Olga sat by Ernest's bedside as usual. His stillness no longer unnerved her. Instead, it became an invitation to speak, to share the parts of herself she had kept hidden. "Hello, Ernest," she began, her voice soft and steady as she held his hand. "I wanted to tell you about Liam. He's doing so well. Brownie never leaves his side. You should see how they play together. It's pure joy. Your son is so strong, but he needs you, Ernest. We both do." Her voice wavered slightly as she continued. "I don't know how or why I ended up here caring for Liam and sitting beside you like this. It wasn't part of my plan, but now I can't imagine my life any other way. You've both become my world." Her fingers brushed over his hand, their warmth a stark contrast to his stillness. "I think I found my purpose in being here with you and Liam. Maybe it's silly, but I've realized something else." She paused, gathering her courage before whispering, "I've fallen in love with you, Ernest." The words hung in the air, heavy with truth. For a moment, Olga felt both a sense of liberation and a deep ache. Looking at his unmoving face, she didn't expect a response. Yet, her confession felt necessary, as though her heart had been waiting for this moment to be unburdened. That same evening, after returning home, Olga found herself exploring the mansion's attic. The dusty room was filled with forgotten treasures, old trunks, framed photographs, and other relics of the Harrison family's past. As she sifted through the contents of a weathered chest, she uncovered something unexpected, a violin, tucked safely inside its case. She carefully lifted the instrument, running her fingers over its polished wood. Just then, Liam appeared in the doorway, his eyes widening at the sight of the violin. "Papa loved the violin," he said softly, a flicker of nostalgia lighting his face. He used to say that music was the only thing that could calm his mind after a long day. Olga felt a spark of inspiration ignite within her. "Would you like to take it to him?" she asked, her voice full of gentle encouragement. Liam's eyes lit up with a mixture of hope and excitement. "Do you think it'll help?" "I do," Olga replied. "Music has a way of reaching us in places words cannot. Maybe it will reach your father." The next morning, Olga and Liam made their way to the hospital, the violin carefully cradled in Olga's arms. As they entered Ernest's room, Olga set the violin aside for a moment and turned to Liam. "It's your turn to talk to your dad," she said, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Tell him everything you want him to know." Liam approached the bed cautiously, his small hand wrapping around Ernest's. His voice, though soft, was filled with emotion. "Hi, Dad," he began. "I miss you so much. I wanted to tell you that I have a new best friend. His name is Brownie, and he's the funniest dog in the world. He ate my shoes yesterday, but I didn't even get mad because, well, he makes me happy." Liam's voice cracked slightly, but he pressed on. "Please wake up, Dad. I need you, and I want you to meet Olga. She's been taking care of me and telling me all about you. I think she's the best thing that's ever happened to us." For a moment, the room fell silent. Then Olga picked up the violin, positioning it against her shoulder. She drew the bow across the strings, and a single, hauntingly beautiful note filled the air. The first note hovered in the room, delicate, yet powerful, before fading into the stillness. Olga closed her eyes and let the music guide her. The melody she played was slow, filled with longing and hope, each note resonating like a whispered plea. Liam watched in awe as the sound of the violin seemed to weave through the air, reaching for something unseen. The melody grew richer, carrying the weight of Olga's emotions. It was a conversation without words, a message sent to Ernest's soul. "Come back to us. We're waiting." The machines monitoring Ernest's vitals began to beep softly, signaling a subtle change. Olga's heart quickened, but she didn't stop playing. She poured every ounce of her love, her desperation, and her hope into the music, her fingers trembling as they danced along the strings. "Dad!" Liam gasped suddenly, his voice filled with astonishment. Olga's eyes snapped open, and she saw it, a faint movement in Ernest's fingers. Her breath caught as the machines beeped again, this time louder, more insistent. Ernest's eyelids fluttered, as though they were fighting to open. The room seemed to hold its collective breath as his eyes finally opened, blinking against the light. "Ernest," Olga whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. His gaze, unfocused at first, slowly found Liam, who was clutching his hand with tears streaming down his face. Ernest's lips moved weakly, forming a single word. "Liam." The boy let out a cry of relief, burying his face against his father's chest. Olga set the violin down carefully, her hands shaking as she moved closer. She reached for Ernest's other hand, which was now weakly lifting from the bed. "You're back," she murmured, her eyes filling with tears. Ernest's gaze shifted to Olga. Though his voice was faint, the gratitude and emotion in his eyes spoke volumes. He gave her hand the gentlest squeeze, a silent acknowledgment of everything she had done. The doctor arrived shortly after, summoned by the commotion. As he examined Ernest, his expression shifted from professional calm to quiet amazement. "It's a miracle," he said simply, his voice tinged with awe. "He's responding far better than we could have hoped." Liam clung to Olga, his small arms wrapped tightly around her waist. "Dad's going to be okay, right?" he asked, looking up at her with wide, hopeful eyes. Olga bent down and kissed the top of his head. "Yes, sweetheart, he's going to be okay." In the weeks that followed, Ernest's recovery became a family effort. Each small step he took, literally and figuratively, was celebrated with joy and gratitude. One afternoon, while seated in his hospital room with Olga and Liam by his side, Ernest turned to Olga with an intensity that made her heart race. "Marry me," he whispered, his voice hoarse but steady. Olga froze, her eyes widening in surprise. Before she could answer, Liam's excited voice filled the room. "Say yes, Mom!" Tears welled in Olga's eyes as she smiled, nodding fervently. "Yes," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Yes, Ernest. 1,000 times, yes." Liam threw his arms around them both, laughing with delight. The day Ernest was discharged from the hospital was filled with a sense of triumph and renewal. Olga and Liam waited eagerly outside the hospital doors, a bouquet of fresh flowers in Olga's hands. When Ernest appeared, supported by a cane but walking on his own, their smiles grew impossibly wide. "Welcome home, Dad," Liam shouted, running to embrace him. Ernest chuckled, bending slightly to wrap his arms around his son. The warmth of the embrace seemed to banish the months of pain and uncertainty they had endured. Olga joined them, placing a gentle hand on Ernest's arm. "You look stronger every day," she said, her voice filled with pride. "That's because I have the two of you to fight for," Ernest replied, his eyes shining with gratitude. A month later, their garden, once the scene of Liam's quiet sorrow, was transformed into a vision of celebration. Strings of twinkling lights were draped across the trees, and vibrant flowers adorned every corner. Friends and family gathered to witness the union of Ernest and Olga, a moment that symbolized not only their love, but the resilience of the family they had built together. Liam stood proudly by his father's side, acting as Ernest's best man. His suit was slightly too big, but the joy radiating from his face made him seem taller than ever. As Ernest and Olga exchanged vows, their voices trembled with emotion. "I promise to love and cherish you," Ernest said, his gaze locked on Olga's. "You gave me hope when I had none, and you brought light to my darkest days. I vow to spend the rest of my life honoring the love you've shown me." Tears streamed down Olga's cheeks as she responded, her voice steady despite the overwhelming emotion. "I promise to stand by your side in all things," she said. "You and Liam have shown me the true meaning of family, and I vow to love you both with all that I am for all of my days." When the ceremony ended and Ernest kissed his new wife, Liam let out an exuberant cheer. Brownie barked happily from his spot near the front row, wagging his tail as if he, too, understood the joy of the occasion. The reception was filled with laughter and tears of happiness. Liam took the dance floor with Olga, twirling her clumsily but enthusiastically. When it was Ernest's turn to dance with her, he held her close, whispering words of gratitude and love that only she could hear. In the days that followed, the Harrison family settled into a life that felt like a dream. The mansion, once a quiet and lonely place, was now filled with the sounds of laughter, Brownie's playful barks, and the occasional melody from the violin that Olga had begun playing again. One evening, as they all sat on the porch watching the sunset, Ernest turned to Olga. "Do you remember what you said to me when I was still unconscious?" he asked softly. Olga's cheeks flushed, but she met his gaze. "I told you I loved you," she replied, her voice just above a whisper. Ernest reached for her hand, intertwining his fingers with hers. "I heard you," he said, his eyes shining. "Even in the darkness, your love was the light that guided me back." Olga's eyes filled with tears as she leaned into him, her heart full. With every passing day, the Harrisons embraced the life they had rebuilt together. They found strength in one another, joy in the simplest moments, and hope in the promise of tomorrow. As Liam played with Brownie in the garden, his laughter echoing through the air, Olga and Ernest watched with contented smiles. "Life has its way of surprising us," Olga said softly, her head resting on Ernest's shoulder. "I never imagined I'd find a family like this." Ernest kissed the top of her head, his voice low and filled with love. Sometimes the greatest blessings come from the hardest trials. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, the Harrison family knew they had found something unshakable, a love that could weather any storm, and a bond that would carry them forward no matter what the future held. If this story warmed your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Leave your name in the comments and we'll give you a special shout out in the next story. And remember, love always finds a way, even in the darkest moments.